Hemingway and his code hero. And then you're going to be working mostly on Canvas today because there are two short stories that I've put on Canvas and they were pretty long, so I didn't run copies for you. You'll have to work through there, and there's a Google Doc that you'll do as well, okay? But your quiz on Gatsby is tomorrow. Got it? Yes? Okay, cool. All right, so did everybody find that paragraph? James Gatz, that was really, or at least legally, his name. Do you guys see that? Okay, grab a highlighter because this stuff's important. In fact, look at my book. Okay, important stuff going on right here. So, James Gatz, that was really, or at least legally, his name. He had changed it at the age of 17. How old are you guys? 17. There you go. He changed it at the age of 17 and at the specific moment that witnessed the beginning of his career, when he saw Dan Cody's yacht drop anchor over the most insidious flat on Lake Superior. It was James Gatz who'd been loafing along the beach that afternoon in a torn green jersey and a pair of canvas pants. But it was already Jay Gatsby who borrowed a rowboat, pulled out to the Ptolemy, I'm not really sure how to pronounce that, and informed Cody that a wind might catch him and break him up in half an hour. So he goes and he kind of saves this wealthy older man, right? If you haven't highlighted anything yet, do so now. I suppose he'd had the name ready for a long time. Even then, highlight this. His parents were shiftless, unsuccessful farm people. His imagination had never really accepted them as his parents at all. The truth was that Jay Gatsby of West Egg, Long Island, sprang from his platonic conception of himself. He was a son of God, a phrase which, if it means anything, means just that, and he must be about his father's business, the service of a vast, vulgar, meretricious beauty. So he invented just the sort of Jay Gatsby that a 17-year-old boy would like to invent, and to this conception, he was faithful to the end. Okay, so we find out the truth about this man, right? And all this time, people have been saying these kind of crazy rumors about him and didn't know how he'd gotten his money. And of course, he's maintained that he comes from family money, but that was a lie. He created this person that he wanted to be. Even before he met Daisy, he had created a persona for himself, okay? And it says that he just did not accept his lot in life, and he saw himself as a child of God. Now, that doesn't mean he was overly religious. What I think that probably means is that he felt he could create himself into anything that he would strove to. He was going to make himself the person that he wanted to be, okay? And so Nick's going to find this out much later, but breaks the narration to tell us that in this particular chapter, okay? So now we kind of go back to the regular action of the story, and I want to look at, I think it might be, it's the same chapter, but it's probably about 6 or 7 pages ahead. He has invited Daisy and Jordan and Nick to come to one of his very big parties. Okay. And, Daisy is intrigued, but at the same time, we talked about that whole carnival scene yesterday. I mean, at the same time, there are some things that she just doesn't really, appreciate about it, okay? In my book, this is on 116. I don't know where it is for you guys. Oh, you know what? Actually, it's just a couple of pages from the end of chapter 6. That'll help. So about 3 pages back from the end of chapter 6, look for she didn't like it, he said immediately. It's in 116 on mine, but
it's 109.
Thank you, 109 in the newer book. Okay, so he has had Daisy over for one of his big parties, and you know that he's not only created this persona that he wants to be, but he's also created this, place for himself right across the water from her. And of course, we talked about how he's thrown these huge parties, wanting anyone and everyone to come, hoping that she would wander in, right? So he's trying, of course, to make a great impression. In fact, everything he's done has been to make an impression on her, right? And here is Gatsby talking to Nick after the party, okay? She didn't like it, he said immediately. Of course she did. She didn't like it, he insisted. She did not have a good time. He was silent, and I guessed his unutterable depression. I feel far away from her, he said. It's hard to make her understand. You mean about the dance? The dance? He dismissed all the dances he'd given with a snap of his fingers. Old sport, the dance is unimportant. Now highlight all this, y'all. He wanted nothing less of Daisy than that she should go to Tom and say, I never loved you. After she'd obliterated 3 years, because that's how long she's been married to Tom, okay? After she'd obliterated 3 years with that sentence, they could decide upon the more practical measures to be taken. One of them was that after she was free, they were to go back to Louisville and be married from her house, just as if it were 5 years ago. Now, romantics are optimistic, okay? Romantics tend to see the good. Romantics also often are fixated on the past. If you were in here when we watched Midnight in Paris, all those characters were fixated on the past, right? Here he is wanting to wipe away not just the 3 years that she was married to Tom, but the 5 years that they've lost, and go back to where they met and marry in her parents' house as if, the last 5 years just hadn't happened. Nick says what we would probably say, okay? Nick says, and I'm going down a couple of lines here. He says, I wouldn't ask too much of her, I ventured. You can't repeat the past. And look at what Gatsby says. Can't repeat the past? Of course you can. That's going to be a problem. Because you really can't repeat the past, right? Okay, that's going to be a problem. And of course, as you get into the next chapter, everything's going to kind of come to a head, all right? And it happens on the hottest day of the summer, and the tempers are rising and things become super intense. And, Gatsby has decided, he and Daisy have decided they're going to confront Tom and tell him, that they're together now, and it is pretty incredible. So make sure that you're reading, okay? All right, now, I want to talk to y'all just briefly about the Hemingway stuff that you're about to do. So let's shift gears a little bit. Hemingway and Fitzgerald, they were friends and kind of rivals because they're writing at the same time. Both of them were expatriates. What does that mean? No. Fitzgerald wanted to, but didn't see combat. Hemingway wanted to, but his dad forbade him to actually, join up with the army. So what did he do? Yeah, became an ambulance driver. And you know what? He was wounded. I mean, he was on the front and saved several people who'd been injured and pulled them away from the front and got injured, himself. So Hemingway is definitely someone who lived the macho, brave life that he projects, okay? But they're expatriates, y'all, and that's an easy thing to remember the definition of because, a patriot's someone who has ties to their country, right? Well, an expatriate is the name given to the folks who choose to live out of their country, okay? So Hemingway and Fitzgerald, and then, Gertrude Stein, who was in that movie, and then Pablo Picasso and T.S. Eliot. There were all these writers and artists who chose to live in Paris in the 1920s, and they are considered expatriates because most of them were from America, other places too. And they were also considered to be a part of what we call the lost generation. And again, the Lost Generation's got a couple of, I think, justifications for that term. I mean, there really was a generation of young men who were lost. They never made it out of World War I because it was so brutal and violent. And then you also have the survivors who physically are okay, but emotionally they are, God, what's the right word? They are affected. They're impacted by that, right? So you have this generation that appears and writes and creates art that is very indicative of how their faith has been shaken. Okay? So, Lost Generation, Hemingway especially, there's a point in his life where he definitely questions like whether there is God. He questions whether there is some kind of afterlife. And he comes up with what is known as the code hero. And a code hero is someone who, even knowing that maybe there isn't anything after our life, maybe death is absolutely the end of it all, he still perseveres and tries to live the best life he can. Okay? There's a phrase that's very famous. It's called grace under pressure. The code hero is going to behave correctly even when he's facing life. Terrible odds. Okay? So you need to keep that in mind and have that sheet handy, because some of the questions after you read these two stories are going to refer back to the information on that sheet. Okay? All right, I'm going to let you work and hopefully finish that so that you can get that Google form turned in. I think it times out at midnight, but hopefully you'll have time to finish it in class so that you can work on Gatsby at home. Yeah. Yes. Okay. And I feel like, Braden, did you get the sheet from the back? Because that's what I was talking about. It's on the round table.
Today.
Yeah. Because you were out yesterday, right? Anybody else out yesterday? Okay, so y'all get to work, and boy, I'm going to be working too. My boss gave me a task to do, so I got to get that done first.